A top grandmaster gets impatient and lashes out, only to get crushed by a teenager's simple pawn moves. Welcome back, everybody. Today we have an absolute banger from the Tata Steel Chess Masters, featuring the 15-year-old Turkish prodigy Yagiz Khan Erdogmus taking on the super strong grandmaster Vladimir Fedoseev. You need to watch this because it's a masterclass in why patience beats aggression, and we see a teenager schooling a veteran on the dangers of weakening your own king. Erdogmus starts with the king's pawn to e4, fighting for the center immediately. We are entering the opening phase, where control of the center and piece development are the main priorities. Black mirrors him with pawn to e5, very standard stuff so far. White brings the knight to f3, attacking the pawn and getting a piece out. Basic principles. And black responds with knight to f6. This is the Petrov defense. It's known for being very solid, sometimes a bit drawish, but essentially black says, "You attack my pawn? No, I attack your pawn." It forces white to be precise if they want an advantage. White captures the pawn on e5. Black plays pawn to d6, kicking the knight back before capturing the pawn on e4. If you take immediately, things get messy, so this is the correct way to handle it. The white knight retreats to f3, and now black takes the free pawn on e4. Balance is restored. White strikes the center again with pawn to d4. Erdogmus wants to open lines for his bishops quickly. Black responds with pawn to d5, solidifying that strong knight in the center of the board. This knight on e4 is the pride of black's position right now. White develops the bishop to d3. Notice how he attacks the knight while preparing to castle. Black mirrors the bishop move, putting his bishop on d6. White castles kingside, safety first. We are now effectively transitioning from the opening to the middle game, where the strategic battle for the center intensifies. Black also castles kingside. So now we have a symmetric position, but the tension is about to ramp up. White plays pawn to c4. This is a key idea. He's challenging black's central control by attacking the d5 pawn. The symmetry is breaking. Black supports the center with pawn to c6. This creates a solid pawn pyramid like a Slav structure. White brings the rook to e1. He's putting the rook on the e-file, eyeing the centralized knight. Even though there are pieces in the way, this X-ray vision is annoying for black. Black drops the rook back to e8, neutralizing white's control of the file. White brings the queen out to b3. I like this move. It adds pressure to the d5 pawn and looks at the b7 pawn, making it hard for black to develop their light-squared bishop comfortably. Scanning for loose pieces, b7 is currently defended only by the queen, so it's a target. Black develops the knight to the edge of the board to a 6. Usually, knights on the rim are dim, but here he wants to jump into b4 or c7 to harass white's bishop. Okay, look at the time usage here. Erdogmus spent nearly 26 minutes, 26, just to play pawn to a 3. He realized that knight jumping to b4 was a serious annoyance, so he takes a massive think to play a tiny prophylactic move. That is maturity. He's shutting down black's queenside play completely. Black plays pawn to h6, creating a little breathing room for the king, preventing back rank issues later. This is often useful, but sometimes it gives white a target to latch onto. White reroutes the knight to d2. The knight wasn't doing much on b1, so he's preparing to bring it to the king side. Black retreats the knight to f6. He saw the exchanges coming and decided to bring the piece home. White trades rooks on e8, check. Black recaptures with the queen. White pushes pawn to c5. He locks up the queenside structure and kicks the bishop. This takes away space from black. By locking the queenside, he is implicitly telling black the game will be decided on the kingside. The bishop retreats to c7. Now the white knight continues its journey, moving to f1. This knight is heading for g3 or e3 to jump into the attack. Black reroutes his knight to b8. It looks passive, but he wants to bring it to d7 to challenge the center. White puts the knight on g3. See that? The knight maneuver is complete. It's looking at the f5 square now, which is a prime outpost. Black plants his knight into a 4. This looks active, but even with pawn support, it can be unstable. White has ideas to undermine it. White ignores the knight for a second and jumps his own knight to h5. He is staring directly at the black king's shelter. The 15-year-old is asking questions. He's hinting at sacrifices on g7 or h6. Black retreats the bishop to d8. This is a bit passive. He's worried about the king side, but allowing white time to build up is dangerous. White develops the dark squared bishop to f4. All of white's pieces are joining the party. He's eyeing that e4 knight. And here it is. Black plays pawn to g5. Oh my goodness. Fedoseev spent 10 minutes on this and chose violence. It's aggressive, but you are severely weakening your king in front of a tactically sharp prodigy. I hate this move for a human. At this point, I think it would have been better to play pawn to f5 to solidify the center. Now, the king is drafty. White calmly moves the bishop to c7. He doesn't panic, he just invades. He knows the black king is now a long-term target. Black takes the bishop, white recaptures with the bishop on e4. Now look at the board. Black's king is open because of that g5 push, and white has a monster bishop on the long diagonal. Black brings the knight to d7. This is a mistake. It passively blocks the queen. I think he should have moved the queen to d8 to activate the queen and keep the diagonals open. Now white has a nice tactical shot. White drops the bishop back to f5. This pin is annoying. The knight on d7 is pinned to the bishop, effectively paralyzed. And guess what? The bishop is also eyeing the weak g6 and h7 squares. Black moves the queen to d8 to defend the bishop. White brings the last piece into the game, rook to e1. Total domination of the open file. All white pieces are active. Black's pieces are tripping over themselves. Black moves the king to h8. He's trying to get out of the way, but he's stepping into a corner with no exit. It would have been slightly better to keep the king on f8 to maybe run to the queenside later. White plays queen to e3. He threatens to invade on the e8 square or maybe sacrifice on h6. The options are endless. Note the h6 pawn. It's looking very loose. Black retreats the knight to f8, trying to hold everything together with tape and glue. White jumps the knight into e5. Look at that outpost. The knight is untouchable and radiating power. If black takes, the d-file opens up. Black plays queen to e7, trying to trade queens maybe? But it's too late. White finally cashes in and takes the bishop on c8, removing the defender. Black recaptures with the rook. White slides the queen over to h3. This is the killer blow. He is eyeing the h6 pawn. Do you see the threat? And look at c8. The rook is undefended. This is a double attack. Black moves the rook back to e8, trying to challenge the file. White brings the knight back to g3. He's just rearranging the furniture to deliver the final blow. He missed a faster win, but functionally the game is over. Black steps the king to h7. He's desperately trying to defend the h6 pawn with the king itself. White plants the knight on f5. This is suffocating. Every white piece is better than every black piece. Black plays queen to e6. This is a blunder in a lost position. He's hoping for a miracle. Queen to f6 would have prolonged the suffering slightly, but not by much. White plays rook to e3, just lifting the rook to swing it over for the attack. Simple and elegant. Black plays queen to f6. Boom. Knight takes h6. The defense collapses. The king is stripped naked. This is the breakthrough we were waiting for. Black takes the knight, but it doesn't help. White checks with the queen on f5. The king has to move to g8. Wait, he blocks with the knight to g6. Same result. White takes on f7 with check. It's getting ugly. Black blocks with the queen to g7. White trades queens? No, he captures the rook, taking on e8. We are technically in an endgame situation due to the material imbalance, but for white, the plan is simple. Checkmate. Black captures the knight on e5. The dust settles, but white is up material and has a raging attack. White checks with the rook on h3. He uses the rook he lifted earlier. Black blocks with the knight to h4. White takes the bishop on e5. Now he has a passed pawn and the black king is still in a mating net. Black moves the king to h6. He is walking into the line of fire. Let's look at a better variation where black blocks check. The queen would step in to block, white would capture the black queen, and the king would take back immediately. This endgame would be much more playable. Okay, now let's get back to the game. White pushes pawn to g3. He's going to undermine the knight support. Black tries queen to h7. It's desperation. White checks with queen to e6. Black's king moves to h5. This is a fatal blunder leading to immediate mate. He had to play king to g7 to survive a few more moves. But now, for the most stylish finish possible, pawn to g4. Checkmate. The 15-year-old delivers the final blow with a pawn push. Absolutely brutal. Erdogmus identified the weakness on the king side, pried it open, and finished with flair. What a performance by Erdogmus. The key takeaway here is how dangerous it is to push pawns in front of your king. Fedosiev's g5 move was the beginning of the end. Also, notice the patience from the youngster. That 26-minute think for a simple pawn move won him the long game. If you enjoyed this recap, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more.